Hello, journeyers. Welcome back to Honoring the Journey. We're going on a really, really special journey today with a guy named Logan. Is it Barone? Is that
You
how we
got
say
it.
it? Yes.
Maroon.
Look
Yeah.
at me, Logan Barone. He is, well, I found him on social media. He has the coolest videos and just such a lovely presence, just a calming, kind heart, which in my deconstruction, I have found that to be what I'm drawn to. I don't want to be mad. I'm just tired of being mad. I went through a phase. I did. Let's be real. But I'm looking for tenderness right now because it has been a difficult journey. And I think that there is a way to do that. And I think Logan aces that. So you're going to want to follow him on social media for sure. But he's also a best-selling author and a spiritual life coach. He, like me, underwent a transformative journey from evangelical ministry to a spiritual awakening. And now he inspires others to embrace their own path of self discovery and connection to the divine within themselves, which is great because I think sometimes religion, we're looking out for that connection. And, now I feel like we've both come to a place, Logan, where we're like, oh, it's inside. Oh my goodness, it's been there all along. Jesus said so. But anyway, yeah, beyond those confines of rigid religion and fundamentalism, which I think many of you are kind of sorting through right now and figuring out. So before we get, just dive into all the good stuff, I kind of want to just get to know you, Logan, as a person, just another human being with a journey and a story to share. But so I'm going to ask you just a very random question. And just the first answer that pops to your mind, just share it
Go
from your
for
heart.
it. Yeah.
What is your most treasured memory?
My wedding.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, tell
Yeah.
me about it. Why was this? Well, of course, we know why it was treasured, but like, what was it like?
Yeah, I think that's why it's such a treasured moment is because there's no words I can even begin to use to describe it. It was ineffable. But so it's almost like what I'm recognizing now is some of the most treasured moments of my life have been the times where I was totally absorbed in the present moment. So
Hmm.
obviously, if you think about it, when you're getting married, standing on the altar and the doors open and I see my wife walk down the aisle. And in that moment, like I wasn't thinking about anything else. My mind was not in the past or in the future. It was just totally absorbed in the moment. And yeah, I can't even begin to explain or describe what that feeling was like. I mean, I can use words like bliss, unconditional love, but those words don't do it justice.
Yeah.
And it's the more I dive into mystical experiences and understanding the nature of mystical experience, what I'm learning is that moment, the moment of whatever it was I was experiencing at my wedding, of that pure infinite bliss when I saw my wife, that was just it was a time where the clouds of the dualistic thinking mind were gone and the pure infinite sky was there. That's actually what these moments of being totally absorbed in the present moment are. It's when we get out of our headspace into our heart space, and that's reality. That's heaven. That's home. And I think that's why all the different sage and mystics and like Jesus, they talk about the kingdom is within you.
Mhm.
It's literally within you. And if you think about you or the I amness, I am is in the present tense. It's always right here, right now. So you can always experience that ground of being at any moment when you shift from the headspace, the analytical thinking mind that's so attached to things about the future or the past, and it's distracting and it's chaotic and it's stuff. So you sink into your heart space and you move past the clouds. And in that heart space realm, there is only love, there's only peace, there's only joy, there's only bliss. And there's certain moments in our lives that allow us to get a taste of that. And my wedding was one of those moments.
That is such a great answer. And it's funny, I just had Paul Young, the guy who wrote The Shack. I just
Yeah.
had him on the show, and he was so insistent. I said, how do you, because he's so filled with joy and wisdom, and he's just amazing. And I said, how do you do it? And he's like, I live in the present moment. He said,
Yeah.
since he was about 50 years old, he decided just to live in the moment and not to worry about tomorrow. He's like, Jesus told me not to do that. So why am I doing
Yeah.
it? You know, and
Yeah.
it was just very, very cool to hear that because God doesn't give us grace for the imagination. He gives us grace for the moment. So when you're
Yeah.
imagining the future, you know what I mean? Like it makes so much sense. So being in that moment and treasuring that, is that maybe something that I guess stirred your heart and your spirit to seek a deeper spiritual connection, or were you already kind of there? What was your story with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I went through one of the most challenging seasons of my life, it just so happened to be during the same time when I was leaving the church I was a part of and I was starting to deconstruct out of evangelicalism. So it's interesting how all that worked and the timing of it all. But with the other stuff I was going through and then leaving the church, there was just so much pain, so much suffering that I was experiencing. And what I noticed was when I would sit with my suffering, it automatically caused me to be present
Mm.
because it's like, what else are you going to do when you're suffering? Right. You just, there it is. And so it was actually when I was going through all of that, I realized that as I would sit with the suffering and turn inward and allow the suffering to do what it does, it's crazy because, now I teach about, acceptance and embracing and allowing things to move through the body. And instead of like rejecting and pushing it away, as far as dealing with, inner stuff like suffering, and I was already starting to practice this before I even knew what it was and how beneficial and helpful it can be. So I was allowing myself to, like I said, just sit there, take it all in, and the thing that was really uh, the thing I was aware of in that moment, like I said, was that okay, whatever I'm experiencing right now in this suffering, it feels different because I'm having to be more here. I'm having to be more present. And what do you know? Beneath the suffering, there was light, and that's when I started reading a lot of the Christian mystics during this time as I'm deconstructing. And one of the ones that really stood out to me right off the bat was St. John of the Cross. And he talks about something called the dark night of the soul and how this is actually something that really um, most seekers on the journey will experience at some point, either
Oh yeah.
before awakening or after awakening, and there can be different seasons
During, yeah.
during, of course, and it comes back. So
Yeah.
it's not like there's just one. But yeah, in my pain and my suffering, I was I really didn't have an option but to be present. And in that, I realized that there was this inner light, this inner divinity that was buried beneath me all the time. Yeah, the entire time, my entire life, I just wasn't aware of it. And that's what eventually led to my awakening. So yes, to answer your question, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit. You were saying you were suffering. You said you deconstructed. Can you kind of walk us through what that looked like? Where did it start? Like you said, you always kind of felt like something was missing. Like, is that something that you felt the whole time you were in church, or was this kind of sprung on you because of something?
Yeah. So I've got to go back to my childhood. I was born into Catholicism. My family was Catholic. Everyone I knew was Catholic. And when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, I remember just being very intrigued and fascinated with mass and the rituals and the icons in the church and the statues and Jesus and the saints and the mystics and God. Like just from a very young age, I was very intrigued by all of those things. And of course, I had those big questions, those deep existential questions about life and, why are we here? Where did we come from? Where are we going?
At
All of that
5?
stuff. Yeah, yeah, at a
Okay,
very
Logan,
young
you're
age.
special.
And
That's
I don't
amazing.
yeah, and it's something that, like I said, I have memories of asking
Mhm.
my grandmother, questions about God and stuff at that
Wow.
age. And
Wow.
she recalls, and so yeah, there was always that spark of curiosity for as long back as I can remember.
And that spark of curiosity is something that religion tries to, you know, snuff.
Yeah,
They don't want you to be
absolutely.
curious. They want you to be
Mm,
certain.
certitude,
And
yeah.
yeah, so that must have been difficult.
Yeah, it was, but I feel like when I was a kid, I kept that in.
Mm.
I wasn't. I had a really close relationship. I still do with my grandmother. So I would ask her questions about God and heaven and hell and stuff like that. But I knew I also had this intuitive sense, like, okay, I can't like ask these questions to certain people,
Yeah.
like teachers or people in the church and stuff like that. So, but anyway, when I was 11, my family left the Catholic Church. We became Protestant evangelical. My mom found this mega church nearby and kind of fell into that whole scene, and it was obviously a lot different than what we
Oh,
were
yeah.
brought up in. And as a kid, like I said, at this point I was 11. I walked into this brand new church setting, and it's like a Christian rock concert, and there's free coffee and playgrounds outside the church, so it was a lot more entertaining. And it was something that was brand new to me, but I was like, "Well, wait, like church can be fun and the pastor can be funny, and I don't have to go through all these rituals." And
Stand
yeah,
up,
so
sit
I'm like,
down, stand up, sit down.
yeah, exactly. So
Kneel.
I'm in. This is my kind of church. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, and so I was at the time I was at a Catholic school, but I switched over to a Christian school. I guess it was they didn't call them it wasn't a evangelical school, but that was the focus,
Yeah, yeah,
evangelicalism, definitely
of
a
course.
Protestant type school. So
Right.
I had this profound shift of being a Catholic and being taught that, the ultimate authority was the Pope. Now I'm being told that the ultimate authority is the Bible, and
Mhm.
that the Bible is pretty much equivalent to God. Like the Bible is God. It's his
Yeah.
word or whatever. So I'm like, okay, well, I love my faith. I love Jesus. Now that I'm being told that, I really didn't know God, I really didn't know Jesus as a Catholic because I didn't know my Bible. Well, damn, I need to start reading my Bible because this
Yeah.
is where all the answers are, and I need to study it. I need to be able to like memorize verses and be able to recite verses like all my new Protestant friends
Mhm.
can do. So yeah, so I started really studying the Bible. I got really into the book of Revelation because
Ooh.
during that time, that was going into 2012, and a lot of people were talking about the end of the world and the
Yes.
rapture and stuff during that time. So that was the
Mhm.
big hype of me walking into the evangelical world. The church we were at, they were doing a series on it, breaking down the charts and the
This is what it
timelines.
means. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that
Those
that was
always
my
scared me
introduction.
so much. Scared me
Yeah,
so much.
yeah, but so yeah, I mean, from that point, I just became I mean, I would have considered myself to be a a super Christian at the time. It was my life. I didn't really know anyone else that wasn't Christian,
Mhm.
and you know how it goes. You get very
Oh, yeah.
involved with the church, going to Bible studies, serving on the weekends. It literally becomes your life.
Totally.
And by the time I was a senior in high school, I decided that I wanted to do this full time. I wanted to be a pastor. I wanted to work at a church. So I was involved with different ministries at the time, literally spending every hour that I had free doing some kind of ministry work. And I was very much into the charismatic world and street evangelism and healing deliverance type stuff. So,
Yeah.
I always felt like there's work to be done for the kingdom. So I need to go out and witness and like tell everyone
And
I
if you
see.
don't, everybody's going to die and go to hell. And yeah, that's
Oh
a big
yeah.
responsibility.
I
Yeah.
mean, and I literally believed that
Me
because I
too.
was I
I
was
totally
being
get it.
told that. And it's crazy looking back at it now. It's like, what? Like I actually lived my life thinking that it was going to be on me if
Mhm.
the person I passed in the mall wasn't someone that I witnessed to and they didn't believe, and like it's crazy that was my belief structure.
Yeah.
But when you're in it and when everyone else around you
It's
thinks that
normal.
way,
Yeah.
I mean, what else is there?
It's funny. I would talk to people when I first moved to Utah in 2018, and I would tell them some of the things I believed, and they would look at me like I was a just crazy person. And I just remember thinking, this isn't crazy. This is normal. And until, it just depends on the angle that you're looking, like if you're looking way up and from a distance, yeah. I mean, you can
Yeah.
totally see it. But if you're right in it, it feels like normal.
Yeah.
And especially when it's so indoctrinated, and it's usually if you start to slip, and you probably got a lot of this too, Logan, like, are you in the word? Are you in fellowship with other believers?
Oh,
Basically, are we still in charge of your neural pathways?
yeah. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's insane. But
Mhm.
I get it. I understand it, and there's so many people that are still in it, and I love you if you are. I have nothing
Yeah.
against you. And that's the hard thing. I think sometimes when you do go through a spiritual awakening is people are like, "Oh, so you think you know it all now."
Yeah.
It's like, "No, I think I'm realizing that I know nothing."
No,
And
nothing.
and I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's that sense of liberation where once you see, you can't unsee
No, you can't. You
and
can't.
there's no going back.
No.
But you just feel free, like deep in your bones, you feel free, and that's all that matters.
I actually made the comparison in my book to like being in a womb. I was like in an evangelical womb, and it felt like home, and it was beautiful, and it was warm, and it was safe, and it was comfortable, and I had certainty, and it was great. And then all of a sudden there was these contractions, which were doubts. And then I was born, I followed the light, and I was born into this new world, and I looked around and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought that was home. This is home." Like, that's
Uh-huh.
how it feels when you have a spiritual awakening. Like, it's
Yeah.
not that where you were was bad. It was just confined. It
Right.
kept you alive, it kept you safe, it kept you where you needed to be. But now, and of course, now you're a little more vulnerable. You don't have the protection of that womb, but you have the adventures
Yeah.
of the world now that you can embrace instead of be fearful of. And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, definitely. No, oftentimes our religious upbringing can be training wheels.
Hmm.
And I talked about an analogy one time, not as good as the one you gave, but
Oh,
I
stop.
talked about how, a bird is born in a nest,
Yeah.
and the nest has a very important purpose in the life
Yes.
of that bird. It has to be in the nest. And there comes a point in time where the bird must transcend the nest and learn how to fly. But the season of being in the nest is part of the journey.
Right. It's not
However,
bad.
it's not bad, but something that once served you and aided you and helped in your process of evolution can become the very thing that eventually hinders you
Yeah.
and keeps you stuck and keeps you in this state of thinking that this is all that there is. But then you learn to fly and you
Mhm.
realize, well, wait a second, like this world, this universe is so
So
much bigger
beautiful.
than what I've been told. And look at
Yes.
all the other nests. There's like
Yeah.
millions of nests, and they all think that, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, when I when I was in that, one of the questions you were asking was, when did I start to understand that there was more?
Yeah.
And for me, it was going into college So I was a part of a pastoral internship at a church when after I graduated high school. And the way this internship worked was you could get credits from Oral Roberts University. So I did that. So I was interning and getting my college credits, taking classes online. And during that time, I uh, I actually had a friend who started challenging me on eschatology,
Hmm.
end times, which again was something that I've always been very fascinated with, and I've studied it for a while, and that was always my main thing, especially when I was doing street evangelism and stuff like that. I would
Yeah.
use the whole, Jesus could come back at any second
Yeah.
to convert as many people as possible. And I knew my timelines, and I had all the different charts, and I would present that, and I would do it in a way that was very convincing and persuading. So that's what really started to get me to think, because he was presenting these different eschatological views to me that were totally opposite of what I had been believing and teaching for all those years. And that once I started going down that rabbit hole, and like his arguments were so convincing and so strong. And I was someone at the time, very deep into theology,
Hmm.
very deep into apologetics. So I wasn't just going to take anyone's word and just believe what they say. And no, like I was going to spend a
Well, if
lot
it
of
wasn't in
time.
the Bible, it wasn't true, right, Logan?
Right, but the
That's what we were
problem
taught.
was exactly, but the problem was my friend was using
Using the Bible.
scriptures and showing me stuff in the Greek, and I was like, "Uh," so
Glitch
that's
in the
what's
matrix.
yeah, that's what it was. It really was. It felt like that, at least, and that
Yeah.
that was when I got honest with myself, and I took about a year of going deep into his version of. It wasn't his version; it was uh, a version that he was believing in, and so he presented that to me, and yeah, I totally changed my mind about eschatology, and then that started everything. That led to the next thing, which was hell, original sin, one doctrine after the next. And every time I would deconstruct a doctrine, still as a Christian, I was still
Right. Yeah.
considering myself to be a Christian,
Right.
and I still considered the Bible to be, inerrant to a degree, the Word of God. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was one doctrine after the next, and then I started realizing, well, wait, if they were wrong about this, what else are they wrong about? So that eventually led me to realizing that the Bible is not this inerrant univocal book that has all of life's answers.
What? I know.
Yeah,
That's
and it
so hard for people to get. It was
uh,
hard for me. I think that took me the longest. And
mhm,
when that became clear to me, it was like I don't know, it was like the world came out from underneath of me. I
yeah,
was free falling all of
yeah,
a sudden because I didn't have my ground, my foundation. Everything was based on that, which is very interesting if you think about it. Because, the Bible says there you should have no other gods before me, but we were worshiping that. But it was our golden calf in evangelicalism. It was if it's not there, it's not true. Everything in it is 100%. It's history book, it's this, it's God's holy word. And so when I realized, okay, it's important, and I don't think the problem is the Bible. I think it's interpretations. I think it's saying, being dogmatic about, what it means. And it's very easy to read the words of Jesus and everybody agrees. You know what I mean? I
yeah.
mean, maybe not so much anymore. They're calling him socialist, but I think it's very, it's just interesting to me that the same book that helped me really deepen my faith as an evangelical is the book that led me out of it.
Wow, yeah.
So
I mean, I often say I studied myself out of evangelicalism.
most people do. I don't think
Yeah.
people understand a lot of times, when you go through deconstruction, they're like, "Oh, you're just angry and or you want to sin
You
or
wanna
you
sin, yeah,
you don't
that's what
take
it
it
is.
seriously." But I mean, I don't think there's been one single person on my podcast or that I've met in deconstruction who didn't take it very seriously, who wasn't
Absolutely.
fully immersed in ministry, wanting to save the world. Like all of us took it seriously. And I think that that's why it led us to where we are.
Yeah.
I really do.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. And that's why I said, for me, it was being honest and just wanting to know the truth.
Yeah.
When I got to that place, which for a while I wasn't there, but when I got to that place, that was when everything started to unfold. And once you see, you can't unsee. And then you
Yeah.
start asking the bigger questions like, well, if this is something that I've been misled on, what else is there? And it just feels like it never ends.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. It's such a process. And it is like as soon as you go, okay, that's where I stand on this, then there's another thing. And you're like, well, let me dive into this one. And
Yeah.
I always use the Bible for my reference. I just read it different now.
Yeah.
It's not a rule book. It's not a template of how God always is. It was more stories of how they saw God or how they assumed God to be. And
Exactly.
then Jesus upping the ante the way he was like, you've heard it said this, but I tell you this. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this guy knows what's up. So I will take his words over anything else. I feel like his words made the most sense. If we have a loving God, his words made the most sense to describe who God is.
Yeah. Well, so much of what he said is timeless, and that's why it resonates with us so much here in
Mhm.
2025
Yeah. Yeah.
because these truths that he was presenting go straight to the heart, and they cause you to almost like enter into this contemplative state where you can feel the shift. You can feel your awareness moving from your headspace, moving from the theology to the direct experience to where your life becomes your message.
Mm.
And you start to see the divine in everyone and everything. And there's transformation that comes from that. And you recognize, I mean, Jesus said this so many times in so many different ways, but you recognize that, wait, like the divine is not just for me. It's not just for my group. It's not just for my religion. The divine cannot be confined to any box, any structure, any theology, any philosophy. The divine is infinite. Therefore, I can directly experience the divine first and foremost in myself, but then in everyone I meet and
Yeah.
in everything. And that alone changes everything because then you start to understand how profound that teaching, that saying actually is when he says, love your neighbor as yourself. I used to think that that meant, oh, I'm supposed to love my neighbor like I love myself. I don't know if he's saying that. I think what he's actually saying is directly what it says, love your neighbor as yourself, as if that which is deepest within you is fundamentally one with that which is deepest within
Them.
your neighbor.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Changes everything.
Well, it takes it from us versus them to just us.
Yes.
And
Well
and
said.
and I'm telling you, the hardest part for me in religion was thinking, and I always had this gnawing, icky feeling, like so that if they don't believe like me, they're going to hell.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I survived believing that, because that in its own self was a hell for
Yeah.
me to believe that that was the truth, because I felt so much empathy. I'm such an empathetic person. And when you think people you love, or even people you don't even know, if they don't believe the right way, are going to burn for all of eternity, I had to, at some point, mentally, I couldn't have really believed that. I couldn't have. It would have destroyed me. And
Yeah.
and so I think, and sometimes I would speak, and people would say, "Well, why didn't you mention hell?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't like that part." I mean, I
Yeah.
know it's true. I know it's true, I would say. But then, to me, it's like that sounds like coercion when you're like, if you don't, you're going to burn in hell. But I love you so much that I'm giving you an opportunity to not do it. It's like,
Yeah.
well, if you love me so much, why did you create me to be empty and without a connection to you? And why would you say the only time that I'm going to be acceptable is when the blood of Jesus is on me, so that when you look at me, you see him? Why am I even here? Why didn't you just create a bunch of Jesuses? You know what I
Right,
mean?
right, right.
It just didn't
Yeah,
I think I always felt that way in my heart, but
yeah,
there was no way I could admit it. No way.
right, because of fear.
Totally. What if
Yeah,
I'm wrong? What if I'm
right.
wrong?
Exactly,
How do
exactly.
you deal with that fear? Or now that you probably don't really have that anymore, but how did you deal with it?
I think for me, I think hell on my deconstruction journey was something that kind of like you, I always had this intuitive sense of, there's something off with this. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid, I had the memory of a house that I was living in. I lived in like 10 different houses. And I know the house, I know exactly where I was. And this had to be, 15 years ago or something. I remember having this random thought one day. I guess I was Catholic at the time. I remember having this random thought where I was like, what if the gospel was Jesus saved the world?
You mean like it says in the Bible?
Yeah. Like, and I would have these thoughts like, what if everyone was saved? Like, how awesome would that be if like no one goes to hell and God saved every person?
Yeah.
So deep down, I always wished that, and I always
Mhm.
had this hope. So maybe I was like a what do they call it? A hopeful
Hopeful.
universalist.
Yeah, hopeful
Yeah,
universalist.
yeah. For all these years, and I didn't, and there was all these different layers of
Yeah.
evangelical dogma that hid that. But no, so I had that, and so when I moved past the dispensationalism rapture theology, and I started to deconstruct hell,
Mhm.
um, I feel like it came pretty easy for me. That one wasn't a big one, and there were so many scriptures that were pointing to some kind of universal salvation
Mhm.
that gave me some comfort. And then I learned about church history, and I learned that, for the
Boom.
first 4 or 5 centuries, the majority of the theologians and church fathers leaned more towards the universalist
Mhm.
perspective
Yep, the
approach. And
atonement
so,
theories came later. It's
exactly.
crazy, but those are what we hang our hat on, you know?
Yeah, and there's a quote from Augustine where he says something like, in this day, there's not a lot of people who believe in eternal conscious torment, something like that. I'm
Mhm.
paraphrasing, but that's what he said. So if you think about that, he said that in the 5th century. So it's like, wait, so what did they mainly believe in? If that was the uncommon view, if that was this newer view that was starting to become popular, then what was the main thing? Well, read Gregory of Nyssa, read Origen, read Clement of Alexandria. You'll find out pretty quickly that they had this hopeful universalist perspective and they saw the bigger picture. So that gave me confidence. I was like, okay, if some of these early church theologians and fathers were viewing it this way and they didn't believe in hell, then maybe I can revisit the scriptures and maybe I can start to deconstruct, and maybe I'll come away with a different biblical interpretation of what the Bible's actually saying. And so, because I was still very much a Christian, I don't know if I was evangelical still at that time, but I still believed the Bible was the inerrant word of God. And if I couldn't find it in the Bible, then I wasn't going to believe it. Going back to me studying myself out of evangelicalism, because that's how I am. Like, my mind, the way it is I'm a deep thinker, and I have like there's got to be some kind of data in order for me to change my mind about something.
Mhm.
So I go to the Bible and I do this deep dive study, and 3 years later I realize there's nothing in the Bible that talks about this place of eternal conscious torment in the afterlife.
Mhm.
Nothing. And yeah, like maybe some of the English translations use words that in a way describe this modern version of hell that we find in Christianity. But this is not what the Bible's saying. I mean, whatever it is, 75%, 77% of the Bible is the Old Testament.
Yeah.
not in the Old Testament at all. And then
Right.
we get
And
into,
you would think they would mention that. You would think that would be in there. It's kind of a
yeah,
big
it's like
deal.
if God wrote the Bible and this is the biggest like thing, you
This
would
is what
think
we're trying
that,
to avoid. Yeah.
yeah, where would he first choose to include it? You would think it would be on the very first page, not like towards the end of the book
Yeah.
in the God.
In a
No,
newer
so
testament. Yeah. Not even
yeah,
in the first part. Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
I learned that. So that's what gave me the confidence and assurance. And that's
Yeah.
what helped me move past the fear of the what ifs because
Hmm.
I knew from a theological standpoint, from a biblical standpoint, that, okay, number one, this is not in the Bible.
Hmm.
Number two, the majority of these theologians and church fathers in the first few centuries of the church did not believe in this.
Right. That is
That's,
what gave me confidence too, because I
yeah,
needed to know that I wasn't just hanging my hat on a theory. That, there were people that really, really believed this who were part of such a deep part of church history. And I thought, huh. And then, you know what I get it? It's like going to a fitting room and like trying something on to see if it fits. Like I was like, okay, so I literally was like meditating. I'm like, how would I feel if there was no such thing as hell? And all of a sudden, there was joy. There was like the fear was gone. And I was
yeah,
like, that's all I need to know. That's all I need to know.
yeah,
Because I do feel like the joy, that unspeakable joy
yeah,
that I kept trying to find in my faith. Um, there was a joy that, okay, good, I'm going to heaven when I die. Because it was all about that. It was all
yeah,
about avoiding hell, going to heaven. But there was really not a whole lot about like how to live right now, you know?
right.
Except as an evangelist, trying to get other people to go to heaven and not
Yeah.
hell.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, it's kind of one of those things meditating. Okay, what would it feel like if really the biggest reason that I'm here is to learn as much as I can? What would that look
Mhm.
like? And I loved the way that felt. It
Yeah.
felt free. It felt alive. I felt like I could actually be myself, my
Yeah.
true self, not my false self, not the one that was trying to please everyone and please God and be the biggest, the only Bible that people will ever read could be you.
Yeah.
All of that was gone, and it felt so much more like who I really am.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
We have such a similar journey.
Yeah.
We really do. Like
Yeah.
I love the way you researched your way into,
Yeah.
like because that's important for people like us.
Yeah. And, there was a lot of people, not a lot, but I guess a few that I was hearing about when I was a Christian who were deconstructing and they were letting go of the belief in hell. And some of these were even pastors, popular pastors. But
Rob Bell.
there, I didn't find out about Rob until later on the
Uh-huh.
journey, and so
Yeah.
then I read his book and Love Wins, and
So
I
good.
love Rob. I have a
Yeah.
deep resonance with
Yes.
him and his journey and everything that he talks about. But no, there were other pastors and other people who were letting go of the belief in hell when I was still a Christian, but their reasoning for it was like, we this is just not a God of love, which is a good reason.
Yeah,
But for me as a
totally.
Christian, I was like, okay, so you're not believing in hell anymore because you don't want there to be hell. But the
Mhm.
Bible clearly says it. So,
Yeah.
so that
Moving on.
I would make fun of those people.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
of
would say
course.
I would never, that's like they're deceived by the devil. I hope
Yep.
I never get to that place. But this was different, like I said, because I
Mhm.
had taken years, 3 years, to honestly study the scriptures from an honest standpoint with honest hermeneutics. And I came to the conclusion that this doesn't exist in the text.
Mm.
And then I started drawing the lines between, okay, well, how did it become imposed onto the text? Well, you had all these external influences. And then, as the years went on and century after century, you had different people who had like authority or so-called authority over the text, and they decided that this is what it says. And we can go on and on and on about that. I know you probably don't want to spend the rest of the podcast talking about how hell was formed, and I actually have many videos on my YouTube where I
Yeah.
dive deep into that, and I really share my journey of what I studied, what I got into, and what eventually led me to totally deconstruct out of the doctrine. So,
Yeah.
if anyone's interested in that, like I said,
Yeah.
that's all on my YouTube.
I'll put links to that too,
Yeah.
just so you can just click and you can go right there after we're done. Not now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hold up. We'll
Yeah. Not
we'll,
yet.
we'll let you do it later.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, so okay, tell me, how is your family with this? How's your mom and dad, and is everybody okay with where you're at?
Yeah, my family's awesome. They
Hmm, that's so good.
the reason I love my family so much, there's many reasons, but this is one of the main reasons is because like they're not really into the whole spiritual stuff that much.
That's my that's my family. They're all like,
Yeah.
"Okay, mom, good for you."
Yeah. But so my dad, both my parents, I guess, are very open.
Mhm.
And they've been that way really since I started my journey, it seems like. They were never too much into the whole Christian stuff as much as I was with ministry. They just didn't have interest and just didn't, I guess, know enough about different things. But like I said, when I started this journey and I started to change my mind and I started having conversations with them about why I'm changing my mind about certain things, and they've been very supportive and, like I said, very open. But they're they are some of the most spiritual people I know because they don't try to be spiritual, and I
Right.
mean that like from the deepest level. So yeah, I haven't had any pushback from my immediate family. My wife has been on board. There's always like that uncle or somebody in
Yeah, I kind of get that.
yeah.
Yeah. One of
And
my
then
parents too, not
okay.
supportive. But
Okay.
I get it. It
Yeah.
doesn't upset me.
Yeah.
I'm not angry. I don't feel like they're stupid or wrong. I'm on a different journey.
Yeah. Sure. And that's something that you learn. And I've had lots of friends, and as you can imagine, like I told you earlier, the church I was a part of, everyone in that church pretty much like believed the same thing, thought the same. So when someone leaves the group, there's going to be pushback. And so I
Yeah.
got many emails and text messages and DMs of people trying to convert me back and trying to save my soul and trying to warn me against all the judgment that was coming my way.
Right.
Uh,
Which is just they're afraid. They're fearful, and when your theology is kind of rooted in fear, that's exactly what you try to do. You try to
yeah,
save somebody from themselves. And
yeah,
that means they love you, Logan.
exactly.
That's beautiful. I
And I
get
was
that.
doing the same thing when I
Hmm.
was in that world and
Yeah,
somebody left
100%.
the flock. I
Oh, how
was
could
going
you?
after them and I was
I'll
leaving
pray
the
for you.
99. Yeah, I was leaving the 99 for the one
Of
who
course.
was the heretic.
Yeah.
So that used to bother me at first when I was first experiencing all
Yeah.
this change, but you learn to let it go and it, yeah,
You
there's
can't
so
take it
much of it.
personal.
Exactly.
You can't.
Exactly.
Because it is a society thing. It is more about sociology than anything.
Correct.
We don't realize how much our environment is forming our persona, and it's tough. I mean, I was reading Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul,
Oh yeah.
and what a character. I love him.
Yeah.
And he said, it was, I think, chapter 14, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I'll just let you know, Logan, I think it's cool. He talks about how when we're going through this world and we cling to something as our truth, you know, we cling to something that resonates. And so the minute somebody tries to tell you, I don't believe that anymore, and they were on your thing that you were clinging to too, they were clinging with it, with you. When they let go, it's almost like you feel like they're tugging you off of it, but they're not. They're just
Yeah.
trying to follow their path.
Sure.
It just feels almost insulting and horrifying
Yeah.
because if I don't have my truth, what do I have?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
fear.
that's hard. It's so hard.
Yeah. Well, what happens is we tend to, when we're living from the ego, we tend to attach ourselves who we think we are with what we believe, right?
Yep.
So our theology, our belief structure becomes who we think we are. And when someone challenges that, either directly or indirectly, by simply breaking away from that belief structure, there's that sense of, okay, I need to do something about this because I feel like I'm losing a part of myself. And
Yep.
it's a personal issue.
Yeah.
That's what it amounts to. And it all goes back to the ego, believing,
Mhm.
thinking that this is who you are. I am my beliefs. I am my religion. Um, and that's why one of the things that happened when I started to move away from all of that was I started having people ask me the question, what are you? What are you
Mm.
now?
They
Are
want
you
to
still a
label you.
Christian? Are you this denomination? Are you this religion? Are you nothing? Are you an atheist? Like they had to come up with some kind of label
Label. Yeah.
to, and it was all about, and we know this, but
Yes.
that's from the egoic mind, the dualistic mind that needs to label, categorize so it can judge.
Hmm. Like, I'm going to put you in this box, you know.
Exactly. So I got a lot of that. And then after just being so fed up with it for about a year, I wrote this blog, and it was called Beyond Belief. And I get into that. I get into the root of why do we have to label and categorize and like associate these different names with who a person is. And what I wrote about in that blog was how, right now, my beliefs are all over the place and they're changing a lot.
Mm.
So if you want to attempt to try to categorize or label or identify me based upon my beliefs, good luck. And
Yeah.
in a joking way, I kind of wrote like of
Good
all the
luck.
different things, I'm learning
Yeah.
from this Buddhist tradition and this philosophy and Christian mysticism and all these different things. And I was like, so is there a name for that? Because that's where I'm at, but it's changing, it's
Yeah.
flowing, it's moving. Um, and yeah, and that was something that, again, I felt like that was such a huge step for me in my journey because I lived in that whole world of needing to label and needing to categorize and being
It's a
attached to what I
control
believe.
thing.
It's
It's a
control.
control thing. That way I can
Yeah.
control the things around me. I can, I already know where this person stands, and I've put them in this box, and so I know what I can and can't say around
Mhm.
them.
Yeah.
I know I need to pray for them.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how many prayer lists I'm at the top of now. I think everybody thinks I've lost my mind, but I I'm like, thank you for praying for
Yeah.
me. I love that. I think that's precious. And that would have been me 10 years ago. I would have done the same thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when you make peace with that and who you were, and you stop being mad at what you used to believe. You went through that, I'm sure too. Like,
Yeah.
oh, why did I believe that? Oh, I
Yeah.
can't believe I taught that. Oh,
Yeah.
it's like, no, no, no. You were doing the best you could with what you knew.
Exactly.
And your heart was in the right place. You were on your journey. It was your nest. It was your
Yeah.
nest.
Yeah.
And it was my womb. It was where I grew and I was nourished and I learned
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Um, but moving on, just
Yeah.
moving on. It's
Yeah.
okay. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly. Yeah. It
You're
was a
not here to
chapter.
destroy. Yeah, it was a chapter. And we're not
Mm.
here to destroy people who are still in the nest or in the womb.
Right.
We're here to tell them, if you ever feel like it's time, there's people out here
Yeah.
learning how to fly, learning
Yeah.
how to, explore and have adventures, that there is hope for your future.
Yeah.
If you're feeling like it's too confining where you're at, it's okay.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I like that. So if you were talking, oh God, my heart is just so, I have such a heart for the invisibles, the people who are out there in the internet looking for a voice that is going to, because they're starting to feel contractions. They're
Yeah.
starting to feel like it's time to start maybe trying to learn how to fly,
Yeah.
but they're scared. What would you say to someone who's just looking for a voice that's saying what they're feeling? What would you say to them at this point?
Yeah. I would say that the most important thing on the journey, on the spiritual journey, is understanding that your path is not going to look like anyone else's.
Mm,
And when you start to understand that and you start to recognize that you do have an intuitive heart that has been guiding you every step of the way, whether you've been aware of it or not, it's been there. When you start to recognize that, then all of a sudden that becomes your compass. And you realize that as I continue to really listen to this and I trust myself, I learn to trust myself, it will lead me into whatever it is I need to experience for my growth and evolution and transformation. And yes, there will be people that come along the way that are guides that can point to that within me, but they're not going to be saying, "Hey, follow me. If you don't do it my way, or if you don't believe like I believe, you're wrong." No, they're going to be pointing you to the truth that's within you.
mm,
So that will happen. But as long as you continue to listen to your own intuitive heart, that's all that matters. And what I'm really interested in at this point is understanding that and understanding how each person has their own journey, their own story, their own myth. That's something that Rumi talked about. He
mhm.
said something one time where he said, like, don't get so caught up in what other people think and their stories and their journeys. Unfold your own myth. That's what I believe we're here to do. And when you, like I said, when you understand that and you start to live authentically, you will know that this is why you're here, and your authenticity is your greatest gift to the world because there's never been another soul like you. And I think from a higher perspective, we are in the early stages of the age of Aquarius. And in this age of Aquarius, it's it's less about being a part of these religious institutions and being a part of these hive minds and thinking like everyone else thinks and believing like everyone else believes. No, this is more about the individual learning to trust their own intuitive heart and then allowing their true authentic selves to be embodied and expressed into the world. I think this is what's going to ultimately lead us to experience the most amount of transformation in the world collectively.
Mm.
I think a lot of times we get into this mindset of, oh, I have to do all these things to change the world, and there's all this chaos and horrible stuff that's happening. And it, or it's the mentality of someone else is going to come save us.
Yeah.
It's the savior mentality.
Maybe
It,
a
it
politician.
or yeah, or anybody,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
but it's that mentality, and of course we see that in Christianity. There's been this hope, and going back to my obsession with eschatology, like I was believing and preaching and teaching that Jesus was coming back and Jesus was going to be the one that fixes everything. But what if the answer is that the savior has always been within you? And when you experience your own inner transformation, then the light that you are starts to shine, and it's an authentic light. It's a fractal, or it's a ray, like I said, that is very unique. But as you start to shine and allow that to do its thing, then and each person experiences that, that is when the collective shift, I think, will start to happen.
Isn't that interesting? The
Yeah.
collective shift happens when we look inside. When
Hmm.
we fix what's broken or at least figure out, inside what needs to happen in our own lives, then we can be a collective awakening. I
Yeah.
think we're so busy always looking on the outside. I will say, Logan, it's hard. And like if you're listening and you're just starting your deconstruction journey, I know the scripture that's hanging you up with everything he just said, which by the way, I fully agree with everything he just said.
Yeah.
I think the scripture that hangs a lot of people up and makes them afraid to trust themselves is that verse in Jeremiah 17, the heart is desperately wicked. Who can
Yeah.
know it? Blah, blah, blah. So, what would you say to somebody who that's their Achilles right now? They're like, oh, if it weren't for that scripture.
Yeah, I'd say, "Why do you believe that?" And they'd
Because,
say,
well, the Bible says it, and
"Yeah."
that settles it, kind
Yeah,
of
and I'd
thing.
say, "Okay, so why do you believe the Bible?" There's different ways to approach it. I'm forgetting how it's broken down, but somebody broke that down in the Hebrew, and it doesn't even really say that
Exactly.
the way
Yeah.
that it's been translated into English. But what I would say is this, I'd say, I understand where you're coming from because I was there and I used to believe that. And that's exactly why I didn't trust my own heart. And I only trusted the people that were leading me, my spiritual teachers. And, you know, then I started asking questions. And the questions I started to ask had to do with, well, wait a second, why have I spent my life outsourcing my power?
Mm.
Why have I just accepted these beliefs and these ideas that I can only trust my pastor, I can only trust the scholars, I can only trust the theologians, I can only trust the politicians, whoever? Like, why have I only been told that external authority is the one and only way? Maybe maybe if I change the narrative that I've been led to believe and I go the opposite way and I start to trust myself and I think too, before you can get to that place of being able to trust yourself and have confidence in it, there's got to be a season of some kind of like deprogramming
Mhm.
subconsciously. Because if you think about it, if you're going to church or if you're going to any kind of religious system where you're constantly being told that there's something wrong with you inherently, you're a sinner, you're broken, you're separated from God, that's a lot of deep subconscious programming. And the way subconscious programming works is through these strong emotions. So if you think about it, if you're being told that you're inherently broken and sinful, what emotions are associated with that? Well, it's fear, it's guilt, and it's shame. Some of the strongest emotions. So those emotions are the very things that are keeping that subconscious programming in place.
Right.
So that's why I say I get it.
Yeah,
But
we both get it. Like, I
yeah,
think you and I probably wrestled through that and had to figure it out.
yeah,
And that in yeah. Again, maybe just kind of sit, meditate, think to yourself, how would I feel if I
yeah,
trusted myself? What would that do to me? What would that what fears would that conquer?
yeah.
And let yourself feel that for a minute. You don't have to stay in that space if it scares you, but I
Right.
guarantee you when you start to go, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm actually pretty capable. I'm actually trustworthy. My heart really isn't desperately wicked." Um,
Yeah.
and what if, I don't know for sure, but what if that verse means the heart that is, you know, not towards growth? Maybe that's a heart that needs to be told what to do. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
heart that is only focused on the physical. Maybe that's what it's talking about. Who knows? Nobody.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that kind of heart is desperately difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
I know because that's the kind of heart I had for a while. It was very impenetrable.
Yeah.
And when you allow that heart to soften and to receive, it changes everything.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point with meditation because for me, when I first started meditating, that is what led me to realize who I really am. And I
Mm,
always make the distinction between who I really am and who I thought I was, right? So before we awaken, we're living according to this egoic programming of who we think we are. And with this comes all the different beliefs that we talked about earlier with
yeah,
I am this, I am that. And it's, if you think about it, all of that, all those different identities that we attach to are simply thoughts, they're ideas that are on the level of the mind.
yeah.
But when you're meditating and you get into deep meditation, what you realize is that, wait a second, I'm aware of my thoughts, I'm aware of my beliefs, I'm aware of all these different things in my mind, I'm aware of my mind, I'm aware of my body. So if I'm aware of all these things, what does that mean? It means I can't be those things.
Mhm.
So the question is, what am I? And that's what we meditate on. What is the I? It's and there are no words that fully describe what it is. It's ineffable, but the words that we use are awareness or infinite awareness or beingness or consciousness, right? It's just this space in Buddhism, they call it nothingness, but it doesn't mean, or emptiness, but it's not like the way we think about emptiness. It's just infinite, eternal awareness. I like the word awareness.
Hmm.
And from this place of pure being, which is synonymous with the eternal now, with this present moment. And that's something else you experience and realize in meditation. From this place, Paul Tillich called it the ground of being. From this place, you realize that, okay, these thoughts that I was accepting and believing, they're just passing clouds, but I'm the infinite sky that's ever present and unchanging. And from that place, that's where the divine is. That is the divine. From that place flows wisdom and love and peace and joy and all these things. That is the kingdom of God. So that is who you really are. That is the true self that, and this is something that I can't tell anyone or teach anyone. It has to be directly experienced.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, like who were you before the thoughts, before the indoctrination, before the beliefs? Who were you or who are you? It's that original innocence, that pure beingness. And from that place, like I said, flows everything.
Mm. That is so beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
You are just such a delight. Like, we need to do this again. It's
Yeah,
so fun. I love it.
absolutely.
I mean, I could
Yeah,
talk about this stuff all day. I
I
mean, my
know.
listeners know I'm obsessed with it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I love your journey. I love the authenticity and the way you're helping others along the way now. Whew, it's so great. And the beauty of spiritual coaching, deconstruction, whatever it is that you and I both do,
Yeah.
is that there is no prescription anymore, guys. It's not like we do the same thing with everyone because
Right.
like Logan said, every journey is so beautiful and so unique and so different. And so it's not like check these boxes and then you're going to be healed.
Right.
It's like tell me what you think. Where do you think you need to go? What is your next
Yeah.
step? What would it look like to feel free? What would you need to change? It's all about digging deep into that, just that beauty of who you really are, and honoring your journey. Like,
Yeah.
what does that look like? So you have I love this coaching package. You've named it Original Wholeness Transformation
Yeah.
Coaching Package. Tell me a little
Yeah.
bit about that. What does that entail?
Yeah. So I pretty much question the entire narrative that we've been given, which is, hey, you're born a sinner because two humans ate from a tree that they weren't supposed to eat from 6,000 years ago. And now, like, all of humanity is separated from God because of that. And until you do something or pray something or believe something, you're going to continue to be separated from God, sinful. And if you die and that's your state, then God's going to send you to hell forever. I question that entire narrative from a higher perspective, and I say, well, says who? Oh, someone's interpretation of a book that's not univocal, that doesn't have this inherent authority or all these things we believed about it. So then it's like, so it kind of goes back to what I was saying, where who are you really before all the things that your mind has programmed for you to believe about yourself? You're not your mind. You're not your thoughts. You're not your feelings. You're not your past. You're not any of that stuff. You're not what people have told you about yourself. I'm interested in learning about who you really are.
Mm.
And what we find is when we start to go down that journey, and a lot of it entails meditation, but what you discover is that there is no original sin. You weren't born a sinner. The idea that a baby is sinful and separated from God is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah,
I believed in that,
so
and,
did
and,
I.
and we all did. But when you really think about it, when you question it, it's crazy. So anyway, going back to the beginning, there is this original wholeness. There's this original innocence. There's this pure beingness. And then I always say the ego is not something we're born with. The ego is something that's developed, it's formed.
Mm,
But
very
you are
true.
not the ego. The ego is exactly who you're not. It's who you think you are. It's another illusion that we grab onto. And so original wholeness is not about this approach where, okay, like I need to be fixed, or I need to be saved, or something has to happen to me in order for me to get to heaven someday. No, original wholeness is about remembering who you have always been and returning to being. And when that happens, the lights come on and you realize that you were never separated from God. You were never a sinner in need of a savior. You were never all these things that indoctrination tells us that we are. And in that moment, there's a realization that you are inherently liberated and inherently loved and accepted simply for your existence, simply for your being. And when you start to embody that and you live from that place, then all of a sudden the subconscious is reprogrammed and it changes how you see yourself, others, God, the world, everything. It's literally that shift that Jesus talks about in the Gospel of Thomas, where he says, the kingdom is within you, yes, but it's also outside of you. And when you know yourselves, the true self, you'll be known and you'll realize that you are children of God. You are divine. That's what the
That's
package
what
is
the coaching
about,
is about.
walking people to remember. It's not about attaining, it's not about earning or striving. It's simply remembering who you really are so that you can live from the inherent liberation that has always been yours right here, right now.
Whew, that sounds amazing. That sounds
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
That's deconstruction.
Yeah.
I mean, like, but like on such a deeper level. Like it's not just taking little things and making sure that that's what you truly believe, but it's I do think one of the most important people that I've met in my deconstruction journey is my true self. I didn't
Mm.
even know who she was.
Wow.
And she's pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I
Of
will tell
course.
you. But you know what? I would have never been able to say that before. And
Mm.
because I thought I was trash, just a sinner, separated from God. The only thing good
Yeah.
in me was Jesus. That's it. And
Yeah.
and how much would it break your heart as a parent? Like I'm a parent. I don't know if you're a parent yet, but when you become a
Yeah.
parent, to think that your child would say, I am a piece of trash. The only reason I'm anything is because of you. Now just cover me so that nobody sees me. They only see you. That would break my heart
Yeah.
that these individual, beautiful human beings would ever think that about themselves. And yet that's not only what I believed, it's what I taught, Logan.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I do what I do now, because I just want to, if I can just undo a little bit and just say, listen, I really believed it. And it taught me a lot, and I didn't not mean it. I had somebody say to me, did you just lie when you came? And I'm like, no, I've just evolved. It's okay. Like, relax.
Yeah.
Um, it's okay. Like, man, it's like what you said. I saw something on your social media today. Like it, and I think I even shared it because it was so good. Talking about how nobody has the right to tell you that you can't change. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay. Like this is your life. If you feel like this change is gonna help you enjoy this beautiful gift of life even deeper, then why wouldn't you? You
Yeah.
know?
And change is inevitable, you know.
Totally.
What creates the most amount of suffering and chaos in our lives is when we don't allow that change to naturally happen and take place.
Yeah.
We
It's
hold
like a
on to
butterfly.
things.
It's like a
Yeah.
butterfly fighting that process of being a caterpillar in a cocoon. You've got to go through the struggle, but you can emerge from it.
Yeah.
And life is way more I just can't even like I get why the LGBTQ community uses the rainbow, because it's colorful when you can see life and see that everybody is significant, everybody matters, everybody is loved. Just and everybody is beautiful. Like before it was all one color, you know? And if you weren't my color, I was going to do everything I could to make sure you became it.
Right.
And so, Logan, you're a treasure, and I honor your journey. I thank you for sharing. Is there anything else you want to say before we head out?
I would just say, I would say it again and I'll keep saying it. Trust your heart, listen to your heart. And I know for many of you out there that this may sound foreign, it may sound heretical.
Mhm.
But my challenge to you would be to spend some time alone in meditation, like Leslie has been saying, where you can discover it for yourself and then go from there. And I think it will change how you see everything. And that's the most important thing about this human experience is transcending and including, as Ken Wilber always says. Every time you evolve, every time you change and you see something from a higher perspective, you're including the different stages or the different seasons that came before that, because now you have understanding and compassion when you're trying to interact with people who see things from the way you used to see it. And I think that's the best approach as far as, like I was saying earlier, walking people and guiding them to discover the truth within themselves for themselves. And yeah, I'll end with this quote from Ram Dass where he says, "We're all just walking each other home."
Mhm.
That's my favorite quote of all time, and it's true. That is what we're experiencing in this human experience. And when you understand that, you have so much grace and compassion for other people and for where they are on their journeys, and you respect and you honor, and you don't try to convert, you don't try to change or anything like that. You let them be, and you trust that whatever it is that they're believing or going through is what they need to experience. And but ultimately, there's no fear in, oh, what if they don't get it right? Or what if they don't believe in the correct theology? Because we're all just walking each other home. All the rivers, all the different streams, they seem separate, they seem different, but they all lead back to the ocean.